Imagine it's 1930. You're standing in the heart of the Arabian Peninsula. Look around. No skyscrapers.
Oh.
No futuristic cities. No highways cutting through the desert. Just scorching heat, sand, and scattered tribes scraping a living. Saudi Arabia, as we know it today, barely exists. Its borders are fluid. Its king, Abdulaziz ibn Saud, is still consolidating power. And the economy? Non-existent. There's no oil money, not even close. The kingdom's main income comes from religious tourism. Pilgrims visit Mecca, pay fees, buy supplies, and that money keeps the state alive. Then, the Great Depression hits. Pilgrims stop coming. Trade stalls. The kingdom's only revenue stream collapses overnight. Saudi Arabia is broke, not budget deficit broke. Can't pay for. Food broke. King Abdulaziz is desperate. He needs money fast or the kingdom could crumble before it's even fully formed. That desperation sets the stage for one of the most important economic gambles of modern history. Enter the Americans. In the early 1930s, U.S. oil companies are expanding globally. They're hunting for oil in risky, uncharted territories, and the Middle East seems promising. But most see it as a gamble. One company disagrees. Standard Oil of California, known today as Chevron, approaches the Saudi king with a deal. Here's the mindset. Western oil companies don't see partnerships, they see control. Oil-rich countries are resources to extract cheaply. Profits. They flow straight back to New York and California. In 1933, the king signs a concession agreement. Americans get the right to explore vast areas for oil. Saudi Arabia gets $35,000 in gold up front plus vague promises of future royalties and loans. By today's standards, $35,000 seems tiny. But at the time, it keeps the monarchy alive. The deal saves the kingdom from immediate collapse. Then disaster almost strikes. For 5 years, the Americans drill. One well after another comes up dry. Heat, dust, rocks, millions of dollars burned. Executives in California are furious. They're ready to walk away. Then, in March 1938, well, number 7 hits something incredible. Not a trickle, not a small flow. Violent eruption of oil, one of the largest reserves ever discovered. The kingdom didn't just find oil, it found leverage. Here's the twist most people miss. Saudi Arabia didn't get rich when the oil started flowing. The Americans did. Under the original deal, infrastructure, technology, and profits all belonged to U.S. companies. Saudi Arabia got royalties, but control remained foreign. The kingdom had saved itself, but at the cost of leasing its future wealth. So, how did this poor desert kingdom go from being exploited by American companies to eventually controlling one of the most profitable businesses in human history? The answer wasn't foresight, was patience. And that's where the real masterclass begins. When oil was first discovered in Saudi Arabia, the kingdom expected relief, a sudden rush of wealth, to transform the desert overnight. Instead, it got a lesson in power. Oil flowed, profits surged, and tankers left the desert every day. But most of the money didn't stay in Saudi Arabia. It was heading straight to America. The company running the show was Aramco, Arabian American Oil Company. Despite the name, it wasn't Arabian in control. It was entirely American. Executives, engineers, decision-makers all from the U.S. Saudi Arabia received fixed payments and royalties, but they had no real insight into costs or profits. They couldn't audit the books, couldn't control production, and couldn't even enter certain Aramco facilities without permission. For the king, this was frustrating and terrifying. Other countries had tried to take on Western oil companies directly. They failed spectacularly. Take Iran, for example. In 1951, Iran's prime minister nationalized the oil industry, kicking out British control. The response was swift and brutal. Sanctions crippled the economy. Then, in 1953, a US-backed coup removed the government entirely. The lesson was clear. Challenge the system too quickly, and you lose everything. Saudi Arabia watched closely. Instead of fighting, it chose a smarter path. The kingdom decided to learn first. Young Saudis were quietly trained inside Aramco. Others were sent abroad to study engineering, finance, and geology. They didn't make noise. They didn't demand power. They observed. They learned how the system worked. Meanwhile, the world around them was changing. After World War II, America became the center of the financial world. The dollar replaced gold. U.S. military bases spread globally. And oil became the fuel of modern life cars. Factories, armies all depended on it. Saudi Arabia sat on the largest known oil reserves on earth. That made the kingdom valuable but also vulnerable. So the leaders made a strategic choice: security over confrontation. In 1945, King Abdulaziz met U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt aboard the USS Quincy. No treaties were signed, no headlines were made, but an understanding emerged. America would protect the Saudi monarchy. Saudi Arabia would ensure stable oil supplies. It was an unwritten deal, but one that would shape the modern world. This protection bought Saudi Arabia time. While other countries were overthrown, sanctioned, or destabilized, the Saudi state stayed intact. And slowly, quietly, the kingdom began to shift the rules of the game. In 1950, Saudi Arabia negotiated a new deal with Aramco, a 50-50 profit-sharing agreement. For the first time, significant oil money flowed into the kingdom. Roads were built, schools opened, hospitals followed. The desert began to transform, but ownership still remained American. Saudi Arabia had learned something crucial. Wealth alone isn't power. Control is. And control wouldn't come all at once. It would come in stages. Saudi Arabia had mastered the most important rule of global finance. Don't fight the system. Head-on use it. By the 1960s, Saudi Arabia had mastered the rules of the oil game. They didn't rush to seize Aramco. They knew that moving too fast could destroy everything. Just look at Iran. Instead, they advanced step by step, quietly consolidating power. In 1962, a key figure appeared. Ahmad Zaki Yamani, appointed Saudi Arabia's Minister of Petroleum. Yamani wasn't just another official. He was sharp, educated in the West, and a master negotiator. He understood a simple truth. The Americans had the technology, but Saudi Arabia owned the land and the oil. The strategy was subtle. Don't fight, don't rebel, don't make enemies. Slowly, legally, and deliberately, the kingdom increased its stake in Aramco. 1973, Saudi Arabia bought 25% of the company. 1974, ownership rose to 60%. 1980, Saudi Arabia achieved 100% control. But here's the twist. The Americans didn't leave. They stayed as technical partners, running pipelines, infrastructure, and operations. Saudi Arabia gained control, but kept the expertise. It was a polite, strategic takeover. No coups, no sanctions, no chaos, just patience, planning, and negotiation. This was more than a business victory. It was a geopolitical game-changer. Owning Aramco didn't just mean money. It meant power control over oil production, pricing, and global supply. Oil transformed from a commodity into a political weapon. With the turn of a tap, Saudi Arabia could influence the global economy. The results were staggering. By the early 1980s, Saudi oil revenue had skyrocketed into the hundreds of billions annually. A country that once borrowed to buy food now stood among the richest nations on earth. Yet wealth brought new challenges. Saudi Arabia had never experienced prosperity on this scale. Cities expanded rapidly, social programs grew, and everyone wanted a slice of the cake. But the kingdom remembered the key lesson from history. Control beats chaos. Money alone wouldn't protect the state. Political strategy, alliances, and timing were just as crucial. And soon Saudi Arabia would demonstrate this lesson in a way the world would never forget. Patience, planning, and strategy had paid off. Now we'll see Saudi Arabia unleash its ultimate weapon, one that would send shockwaves through the West and cement the kingdom's position as a central player in the global economy. By the 1970s, Saudi Arabia had more than wealthied, had leverage. The kingdom now controlled a huge portion of the world's oil supply, and the world was addicted to it. But knowing you have power and actually using it are two very different things. In October 1973, that distinction became painfully clear. The Yom Kippur War broke out. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. The United States quickly moved to support Israel. But Saudi Arabia, led by King Faisal and guided by Ahmed Zaki Yamani, saw an opportunity. Saudi Arabia, along with other OPEC members, did something shocking. They cut oil production and imposed an embargo on countries, supporting Israel, especially the U.S. The result: global chaos. Oil prices quadrupled almost overnight from $3 a barrel to nearly $12. Gas stations ran dry. People panicked, sometimes even fighting for fuel. Stock markets plunged, and the era of cheap energy ended forever. Suddenly, Saudi Arabia wasn't just a supplier. It was a global power player. By controlling supply, the kingdom could manipulate prices, force economic decisions, and shape geopolitics. But power comes with risk. The U.S., desperate to avoid long-term disruption, considered drastic measures. There's a famous story that Henry Kissinger debated bombing Saudi oil fields to end the embargo. King Faisal's response? "We come from the desert, can live on dates and milk again. You need oil more than we do." This was more than bravado, it was strategy. Saudi Arabia knew its value and wasn't afraid to wield it. After the crisis, both sides realized a long-term solution was needed. In 1974, a secret deal was struck. The U.S. promised military protection, advanced weapons, and security for the Saudi royal family. Saudi Arabia promised to price all oil sales in U.S. dollars and reinvest surplus funds in U.S. Treasury bonds. This simple arrangement created the Petrodollar system, one of the most brilliant financial strategies of modern history. By pricing oil in dollars, Saudi Arabia ensured global demand for the U.S. currency, while buying U.S. debt funded the very military protecting them. It was a perfect economic loop. Saudi Arabia became untouchable, and the U.S. gained financial stability. By the mid-1970s, Saudi Arabia controlled oil production, prices, and global energy flows. They weren't just rich, they were essential to the global economy. But sudden wealth also brought challenges. Cities expanded, social programs grew, and government spending surged. Rapid urbanization and societal change created new pressures, but the kingdom never forgot. The key lesson: control and strategy matter more than raw resources. Oil alone doesn't make a nation powerful, how you use it does. Saudi Arabia had turned oil into a weapon and built a decades-long partnership with the U.S. Now, we'll explore the kingdom's vision 2030. Massive global investments and strategic pivots that aim to secure Saudi Arabia's future, and why the world is now watching every move. By the 1980s and 1990s, Saudi Arabia had money, power, and influence, but wealth alone wasn't enough. Oil prices were volatile, new reserves were discovered globally, and a growing population demanded jobs, welfare, and prosperity. Fast forward to 2015, King Salman sits on the throne. But real power rests with his son, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. He saw a stark truth. The Saudi economy was a one-trick pony: oil. And if the world shifted to green energy, that trick could disappear. So MBS launched Vision 2030, a bold plan to transform Saudi Arabia from an oil-dependent state into a global investment powerhouse. The strategy was simple, ruthless, and audacious: cash, control, and chaos. Ritz-Carlton Shakeup 2017. Hundreds of princes, businessmen, and officials were detained under anti-corruption claims. Many paid enormous settlements to regain freedom, consolidating both power and capital in MBS's hands. Over $100 billion changed hands, securing both loyalty and wealth. Aramco IPO 2019. Aramco had been a state secret for decades. MBS sold just 1.5% on the stock market, but that slice raised $25.6 billion, the largest IPO in history. This wasn't just money, it was a signal. Saudi Arabia was ready to play on the global stage. Public Investment Fund PIF. Unlike the 1970s, when oil money sat in ludicrous U.S. bonds, today's Saudi Arabia invested globally. Stakes in Uber, Lucid Motors, Newcastle United, esports companies, and more ensured that the kingdom owned pieces of the future, hedging against declining oil demand. Inside the kingdom, rapid modernization reshaped society. The Line, a futuristic 170-kilometer city across the desert. Troja, a desert ski resort. Free healthcare, education, and government jobs turning Saudi Arabia into a welfare powerhouse. The social contract was clear: wealth in exchange for obedience. Vision 2030 wasn't just about money, it was about geopolitics. For decades, Saudi Arabia relied on the U.S. for security. But by 2020, America became energy independent thanks to fracking. So Saudi Arabia pivoted east, making China its largest trading partner. China doesn't lecture on human rights, they just write checks. The kingdom even brokered a diplomatic reset with Iran, signaling a multipolar strategy.
Right.
But power comes with a cost. Millions of migrant workers face harsh conditions. Political freedoms remain limited. The murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 reminded the world that wealth and influence often cast a long shadow. So, how did Saudi Arabia really get rich? It wasn't luck or oil alone. They mastered leverage, patience, waiting decades to take full control of Aramco. Ruthlessness, weaponizing oil in 1973 to reshape the global economy. Adaptability, pivoting from the U.S. to China when geopolitics shifted. Vision, transforming resource wealth into a post-oil future with cities, investments, and infrastructure. Saudi Arabia realized early, oil isn't just fuel, it's power. They decided they would rather be feared and wealthy than liked and poor. Whether Vision 2030 succeeds or becomes a trillion-dollar mirage, one thing is clear: Saudi Arabia is no longer just a gas station. They are the landlords of global energy, and the rent is due. From desert poverty in 1932, controlling global energy, building futuristic cities, and investing worldwide, Saudi Arabia shows how resources, strategy, and timing create true wealth.